Welcome to Untaught Essentials. I'm Jeremy Hunter. We're taking a little break for the holidays, and I hope you are too. So this episode, we're going to feature an interview that Nishant Garg did with me early in 2021 for his own podcast, The Nishant Garg Show. I'll put the link in the show notes. Nishant says that his mission is to help people get in touch with their emotions and feelings, connect with themselves, and be a source of healing. His job on the show is to sit with world-class experts to deconstruct the practices, routines, and habits to help people live a fulfilled and abundant life. I have to say, Nishant is an excellent interviewer. We had a very wide-ranging conversation. We talked a lot about Japan, the considerable resources that Japan has to offer about quality of life, my own approach to the good life, the blessings of mortality, and the role of beauty in fortifying us in turbulent times. Among other things, we also talked about parenting, my relationship with my parents and all, not that anyone would care, but I very much enjoyed this conversation, and it turns out it was one of Nishant's most downloaded episodes for 2021. So in case you didn't catch it, we wanted to share it with you. Also, a big congratulations to the man behind the scenes, Jason Beck, who successfully defended his dissertation this month. Congratulations, Doctor. We are looking forward to sharing with you a great set of conversations with fascinating guests in 2022. So please stay tuned. In the meantime, happy holidays.
Jeremy, welcome to the show.
Hi, Nishant.
Thank you so much for being on the show, Jeremy. And I was scrolling through your social media. I thought if we could find some good points from your social media. I realized that you have so many posts regarding Japan and food regarding Japan. So what is your connection with Japan?
Well, I'm half Japanese, and my great grandfather was a sumo wrestler, which I found out about in my 40s. But my wife is Japanese. I have a business in Japan that I run with two former students, and up until last year, I was going to Japan every quarter. So it's a kind of alternate existence I have on this planet, and it's a great one, right? Japan is a wonderful place to be.
I have not been to Japan, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners may not have been to Japan. So what does it feel like to be in Japan?
Oh, well, I think that one of the things that draws people to Japan is this quality of refinement, both material and energetic, that is very hard to find in other places in the world. And so whether that's aesthetic refinement in terms of food, the refinement of how a relationship is conducted, even how the person at the store puts things in the bag as they're checking you out at the register, is also an exercise in refinement. And it's a really, Japan as a culture has incorporated beauty and aesthetic qualities, so deeply into everyday life that I think most Japanese just take it for granted. But it's a really, I don't know what I want to say here. It's a very nourishing thing to be in. And I just find it to be it's a very profound experience being in Japan, and not to say that it's all, rainbows and unicorns all the time, but nothing is in this world. But it is a very special place. And, I can remember reading Pico Iyer's book, The Lady and the Monk. And I think on one of the beginning pieces of it is a sign that he saw at the airport. It said, welcome to Japan, where our old is older and our new is newer. And I thought, oh yeah, that perfectly captures everything. But yeah, it's a magical place.
You mentioned about the qualities that you see in Japan. What are those qualities, if you could name some of them, and that differentiates between living in Japan versus living in different parts of the world?
Yeah, that's super interesting. The first thing that comes to my mind is quality of attention. And I think that the attention that is paid to details in daily life, and not just material details, but that the details of how you conduct yourself. I mean, there's an inborn elegance that's really quite, I think, powerful to encounter. I think that this is actually something I've been thinking about a lot lately. Is that, when I was in Japan in the 1990s as a college student, occasionally you would find travelers there, but it wasn't a common thing. And now there is, a kind of literally like a tsunami of visitors. Well, at least until the pandemic, and that Japan somehow has become a kind of magnet for travelers. And I was at my friend's office that's on this kind of main thoroughfare watching all of these foreign tourists walking by, and I was kind of wondering, like, why are they all here, and what brings them here? Because it's in fact in Kyoto now it's become kind of a social problem that there's so many tourists that it's kind of choking out the the infrastructure of daily life in some way. And I think one of the answers I came to is that because there is in Japan still very much a commitment to the analog, and whether that's the material object of craft, whether that's the quality and beauty of the meal you're eating, whether that's like bathing culture or any of the Zen arts like flower arrangement or tea ceremony and all that sort of stuff. I mean, that is really part and parcel still of daily life in Japan, that there's something that ties you to the material world in this very beautiful, aesthetically forward way, that as the world becomes more and more dematerialized through screens and digital devices, that increasingly is just a part of our day-to-day landscape, our connection with the material world, I think in some way becomes weaker. And Japan has an opportunity to define, I think, a kind of hybrid culture of how do you coexist in what is now two worlds, which I think in maybe 5 or 10 years we will not make a distinction between the digital world and the real world, right? I think that will gradually get wiped away. But Japan has an opportunity to show the world, how do you integrate a meaningful, beautiful, thoughtful, material world with a digital existence, because you can't, I tell my Japanese friends all the time, look, you can't digitize a bathtub. You can't digitize hot springs, right? You're living in a body, and these kind of traditions and practices help reconnect you to the fact you're living in a body, and in a way help ground you to your own reality in a way I think most other cultures don't have tools to know how to do, or don't do it nearly as well as the Japanese. And I think you're going to see some interesting things. This is my next project, actually, but I think you're going to see some interesting things come out of Japan, because there is this real tension between how do you ground yourself in your reality when a digital reality can take you anywhere, right? It's totally disembodied. And we know that there are aspects of that disembodied existence that aren't positive, right? That they provoke a lot of anxiety or depression, or a kind of, at times, a kind of very dysphoric sort of experience, and we need to know how to navigate this well. So I think that's really one of the promises, I think, and one of the kind of maybe subconscious attractions that people have to Japan, because they want to touch that, right? They want to make connection with this analog kind of world, because we are at heart analog creatures. And I think that's the attraction right now.
I would love to ask you about your relationship with your parents. And the reason I'm asking is because a lot of Asian parents have certain expectations from their children, that you have to be successful, you have to be this way or that way. So what was your relationship with your parents like?
Well, truth be told, I can remember being a junior high student and my mother, having these fantasies of when we live in the White House. And she had this whole fantasy of what she was going to do to the Rose Garden. And at the same time, I was free to pursue my own interest. So I think how I resolved that was to get a degree in public policy at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard, give her the diploma, which is currently hanging on her bedroom wall, and say, here, Mom, this is for you. I'm not going to become the president of the United States. Okay. I paid my filial debt to my parents and I went on my way and did what I wanted. That's how I resolved that situation. It's maybe a kind of hybrid East versus West solution to this issue, but I certainly had it too. I get it. Yeah.
You mentioned about bathing culture. Could you describe what is bathing culture?
Sure. In the Japanese context?
Yes, or any context.
Sure. Well, let's talk about the Japanese one because that's the one I know most about. But, in Japan, there's a culture of hot springs and, seeing hot springs as a place of healing and repair and leisure. And at home, until at least in the contemporary period, right now, people are wealthy enough to have bathtubs individually in their individual houses, whereas you would in earlier eras, you would go to the neighborhood bathhouse. And so the bathhouse was a kind of communal place. It was more ecological because you didn't have to heat up water for every house in the neighborhood. And it was a place to also obviously, clean yourself. And purity is a big theme in Japanese culture. And so the way of bathing in Japan is very different than at least in the West, right? Which is that you clean your body before you get into the bathtub. And then you use the bathtub as a kind of soaking place, and that the bathtub has the capacity to kind of constantly heat the water so it doesn't get cold. So you're just kind of resting your body in this hot water. And I realized that a lot of methods for kind of Japanese self-management, if you want to call it that way, are physiological. So, you manage stress not by like changing your thinking. You manage your stress by putting your naked body in 44 degrees Celsius water, which is incredibly hot. And, that your muscles can't maintain tension in that environment and that they just physically release, right? And then it helps you also to sleep better. So in my house in Los Angeles, we have a Japanese tub, and which I have to say is like one of the best things we ever did. So every night, and then you also, I think most households keep the water, and so you keep it, and then you reheat it the next night, and you use it again. So it's very ecological. And in Japan, some houses even use that water a step further to fill their clothes washers with. So it's a place of purification and restoration, not just of hygiene, and
Mm-hmm.
and I think that having that is, having access to that in your daily life is something that I think of it as one of the great Japanese secret weapons. Like at the end of the day, basically anybody can have a hot bath, and it is a great thing for your body for both stress relief and to set yourself up for a good night's sleep. I
How
don't know if
often
that's the
do
answer
you?
you were looking for.
It does. How often do you take hot bath or Zen Japanese bath?
Oh, every night, every day. It's interesting because, quality of life in Japan is a far more ordinary thing. How you think of quality of life is not glamorous. It's about how do you take the existing moments in your daily life and kind of use them or approach them to their kind of utmost potential. So the bath, there's nothing exotic about a bathtub, but it's an incredible experience to be able to step into hot water that is made constantly hot and let your body and mind just simply rest in that place. And it's a great thing.
What do you feel after that bath in terms of psychological, physiological
Sure.
benefits?
A kind of refreshment that is really bone deep, that you've kind of released some tension you've been holding throughout your whole day, or as I said, your muscles can't maintain the tension in this hot water. And so they just kind of spontaneously let go. And so it's glorious. I have no idea. I mean, at least for, American audiences, American bathroom technology hasn't left the 19th century. And like, folks, you are missing out. Okay. Like, I don't know why every house doesn't have a Japanese toilet and a Japanese bathtub, but if you did, it would be much better. So,
Earlier in the conversation, you mentioned about that you were studying in Japan in 1990s. What were you
yeah.
studying?
Well, being half Japanese, Japan was always for me a refuge, and I love Japanese culture, and so that's what I was studying. And I was, basically I'm a country boy, and it was really exciting to be in this, the world's largest city that also happens to be the world's safest city and one of the world's most cosmopolitan cities. And it was a great adventure to be in this place and to kind of step out. I think this is probably more true than any other moment in history, but the capacity to step out of your own cultural framework and immerse yourself in another cultural framework to see that there's a different way to approach this question of how to live a life is a really powerful thing. And I think that probably that's more true for more people now than ever before. But I think it is also even more necessary to be able to do that, to realize that your way of seeing things or doing things is not fixed, and that you have a lot more options to be able to create choices for yourself when you're able to shift in and out of different cultures. And that's, I think, one of the many blessings of being, bicultural, is that you got different systems you can run on your platform, basically.
And what does quality of life mean to you? How do you define it for yourself?
A really good question. I think that I think about it in concentric circles, and the innermost circle is the moment. Like, what's happening in the moment? How are you aware of what's happening in the moment? Are you able to manage and deal with what's happening to you in this moment? And then it kind of expands out into your life and into your relationships and into your work and the communities you're involved with, to the whole planet. And so quality of life kind of unfolds at those different scales, but it starts in the moment. And how do you manage yourself in the moment, which is the basis of all my work. Is like, if you can't manage the moment, you'll be hard pressed to manage anything else in your life. And so that's where it starts, because your life is made up of moments. And I think about it like every moment is a little slice, and that at the end of your life, you got all your slices together, and that's your life. You're born and you die, and you have this finite series of moments. And for many of us, we walk through it kind of mindlessly. And we talked about intention earlier, I think right before we started. And are you clear about what you actually want in this life of yours and what's important to you? And then do your actions in the moment reflect that intention? And because if it doesn't, then you're going to be kind of out of alignment with that. I'm a father, and my son is 5, and I thought a lot about what kind of relationship do I want to have with my son. My wife and I talked a lot about this before he was born. And is he going to be interested in talking to his old man when he's 15 or 16, right? And what kind of relationship are we going to have when he's 20 or 30, and if I live long enough, 40? And so, I have a picture of what that relationship is like. So now that he's a little guy, and maybe I'm working or something, like sitting at my desk trying to put some words together in a thing I'm writing or something like that, and he comes and tugs at my shirt sleeve and says, "Hey, Papa, do you want to come play right now?" Then I have to ask myself, is what I am about to do or say going to help me create the relationship I want to have with my son when he's 15 or 20 or 25, or not? And I think it's super easy to say, go away, kid, I'm busy right now. But I can say, go away, kid, I'm busy right now, only so many times before he stops coming. And I am really acutely aware of that, and that, so what I choose to do in this moment needs more often than not to reflect that vision of what I want my life to be like.
Could you paint this picture of your relationship with your son while growing up?
Oh yeah, it's a great question. That we talk to one another, and that it's enjoyable, that we enjoy spending time together. And my son sees me as a reef source to come talk to and help him figure out his life and share his victories and share his pains and losses, and that we walk through this together. And that's the best probably any parent could hope for. But I have a bunch of rules I made for myself, partially from what I learned from my students and their experiences. And it's been really instructive to be able to read, my students who are all high functioning executives, to be able to read their homework for the last 20 years to see what their lives are like. And then I learn, okay, what do you do? But I think that the best I could probably do as a parent is the rules I created was that when I'm talking to him, I always look him in the eye. And especially if I've got a phone in my hand, I can remember a story from one of my students where it was many years ago now, and he had just gotten a BlackBerry, or they had just come out or something like that. And his young son was tugging at his shirt sleeve saying, hey dad, can you listen to me? And the dad is saying, yeah, son, I'm listening to you. And then the son, while he's holding his BlackBerry, and then the son tugs at his shirt sleeve one more time and says, no, dad, I want you to listen to me with your eyes. And like, I never forgot that moment. That's like that was like a stake to the heart in some way. Like you could feel that child did not feel connected to his father at that moment. And I was like, note to self, right? Always look your kid in the eye when you're talking. And, as an affirmation of his identity, I would say I would give myself an A-. My son would probably give me a C, but I think I'm doing okay.
Did you grow up in a family where your parents and elders talked to you about present moment awareness and all such things?
We didn't talk about it. I think we just did it. In that way, my father was really quite an instructive teacher. I think he's a very good listener. In that way, I think I had really good modeling, and it was helpful. Now, having said that, he did teach me how to meditate when I was 9. And I grew up in a small town in the Midwest, and I was reading books at the age of 10 on astral projection to try to figure out how to get there. But unfortunately, it never worked. I ended up buying a bicycle, and that satisfied the need to move around. And if anybody's figured out astral projection, call me, because flying isn't so savory right now, or so ideal right now. But yeah, I think as I have gone through life, one of the most important skills we never teach people is simply how to listen. And that is like 90% of being an effective human being, is just shutting your mouth and listening to someone else, and how it shocks me how rare it is to encounter somebody who's a really good listener. And yet that gift of attention is something that is, it's really the most valuable thing you can give somebody.
I will come back to the listening part. And before that, I want to ask you about your meditation journey. So at the age of 9, what kind of meditation you started with?
Oh, I think just your standard run of the mill, come back to your breath sort of thing. And then I think as I grew up, I realized in retrospect, I was doing loving kindness meditation for people, as a kind of prayer before going to bed every night. And then when I was in my 20s, I was diagnosed with this supposedly terminal illness that I was told I had, basically 90% chance of dying within 5 years. And that kind of highlighted more the importance of this kind of inner journey. I saw there was no cure for this disease. There still isn't a cure. It's an autoimmune disease attacking my kidneys. And I took it as a kind of spiritual challenge because the medical science couldn't really speak to it in some way. And so learning how to understand and work with and transform what was going on inside me really became kind of center stage for what I think my life was about. And so it kind of evolved from there. And then from there, I've studied in a lot of different traditions, and it's been quite an interesting journey, I have to say. The inner world is just as infinite. Inner space is just as infinite and vast as outer space. And that's really helpful to know when you're on lockdown.
After you got diagnosed with terminal illness, what changes did you make after that in your inner and outer world to just move forward with positivity or something like that?
Well, it wasn't always forward and it wasn't always positive, but there is a certain gift in knowing at an early age that your time is finite. And that really clarifies what is important. Going back to attention, one of my axioms is that, your life is what you give attention to. And it made me clear about what I was not going to give my attention to. And that it was okay to not pay attention to certain stuff, and simply because your attention is finite and your time is finite. And you should, if you want to get to your last day of life and look back on it, with some kind of good feeling, you have to be, I think, a little bit more clear about what you are and are not going to give your energy and attention to. And I think that's probably the biggest thing. I mean, I could talk for hours about this. So but I think that's the big one, right?
What are the things that you don't want to give your attention to at present in your life?
Sports, professional sports, of which I have no control over. So
Why?
I have, why should I let my mood be dictated by whether my team wins or not, right? Which is not to say that anybody else shouldn't be interested in this, right? Because that's exciting, fun stuff, but it's just not really important to me. I know almost nothing about wine. I decided that wine was something I was not going to learn about because it would be some rabbit hole down which I could go and never return and probably end up with a garage full of booze that I would never drink. Yeah, I mean, everybody's got their own list of stuff that's not really that important to them. But I think really honor that and know that it's okay not to pay attention to things that you don't care about.
I want to ask you about your current meditation practice.
Sure.
Could you share that, please?
Parenting is my current meditation practice, and it demands of you all the things that, what I think we would think of as a kind of formal meditation practice does, right? Like, are you paying attention? Are you aware of all the stories going on in your head right now, that you're ready to go and your son is still in his pajamas or is resisting putting his shoes on to go out to the car? Like, what's going on in your mind right now? And are you able to approach this situation with love in your heart? That's an ongoing meditation practice. As a formal thing, every morning after I wake up, I spend just in bed just scanning my body, right? And either working with the dream that I had or just running my attention through my body and, untying knots that are there or whatnot. I'm of really two minds about this, and especially with my students and then, who are kind of very busy people, whether having an official meditation practice, like a formal sitting practice, is actually useful or not, which I think is a kind of controversial thing to say. For a beginner, I think it is far more useful to use your daily life as a place of practice. Your relationships, your day-to-day actions, use that as the arena for your own development. and then gradually step into a meditation practice from there, as opposed to, because I think for a lot of people, they can use their meditation practice as a way of escaping their life. To me, that's totally counterproductive.
What do you mean by escaping their life in the context of meditation?
Like look at Siddhartha Gautama, right? He escaped his life. He left his family and went off to the woods. But, I think that for some people, it's a way of stepping away from the chaos, and which sometimes is necessary, right? Absolutely. And to think that if it is, I think, very easy for folks to think that the meditation practice is more important than their daily life in some way, right? Like, I don't know how many times people have said to me, and that it can become a kind of odd object of neurotic fixation. So like, oh gosh, I haven't been able to sit today. I'm a bad meditator. And which is then like totally counterproductive. So I think it's more useful to use the insanity and craziness of your daily life as a way of watching and refining your own mind. My favorite kind of archetypal example is a client of mine who has a family of blended children. I think she has 4 or 5 kids through 2 marriages. And she said, I'm driving on the highway and, all the kids are in the back and, busy California traffic. And I look up in the rearview mirror and I realize I can't see out of it because somebody has taken their peanut butter and jelly sandwich and smeared it across the rearview mirror. And which I think is great, right? I mean, so, okay, that happens. Now, what are you going to do? And she said, the previous me would have gotten angry and started yelling. But after like doing these practices, I looked up in the rearview mirror and I stepped out of the situation and I saw just the pure comedy of it. And I just started laughing. And she said, it was such a revelation that was even a possibility, right? Because I could see the previous me getting so angry at this and that we would have ruined our weekend, that I would have lost it. Everybody went in a bad mood and there it goes. But the fact that I was able to see it, step out of it, see this kind of existential comedic moment of this purple jelly and brown peanut butter smeared across my rearview mirror of the family minivan. It became a wonderful moment for us, right? And that to me is what counts, right?
And what practices do you suggest or recommend to leaders and executives you work with? Meditation is one of the ways. How can somebody cultivate this way of mindful living? It's not going to be easy. So how do you do that?
But it is, I would say, in the end, more rewarding and more effective because it's integrated into your life. I mean, that's the point I wanted to make earlier about the meditation practice, right? It can very easily not be integrated in someone's life. And I think we all know people, and I may be this person too, that, okay, you're sitting on your meditation cushion and you're feeling nice and peaceful. And then you get out into the car and you get into traffic and you turn into a raving maniac, right? Well, where did that nice, peaceful person go? So instead, it's important, I think, to understand that you at some level are constructing your experience. I don't mean that in some weird metaphysical way that if I just close my eyes and hope real hard that a Maserati is going to show up in the driveway, but rather that we're co-constructing our experience in the meanings you give things, in the emotional reactions you have, the stories you tell yourself, the judgments you have, and that you can begin to watch that, right? And so the simple way to do it is just to like open up your inbox and look at the different names in the inbox. And then you come across a certain name that you like, and then you start to see, okay, here's a whole set of stories that go along with that name. And then you see another name, maybe your boss or your most difficult client or your difficult customer. And And then a whole other set of stories come out that are very different than when you see your best friend's name or something like that. And by being aware of that construction process, right, then you can start to dismantle it. So one of my favorite stories around this, I was working with a group of financial advisors, and I asked them to think about, okay, well, who's your most difficult client? And the fellow in the back room, his name was George. He throws up his arms and he goes, "Oh God, Joan." And I said, well, like, and everybody laughed because, everybody had their own version of Joan. And I said, okay, what are the stories you tell yourself about Joan? He goes, oh, that's easy. Joan wakes up to ruin my day. And I said, okay, so imagine like Joan's calling you right now. You see her number on caller ID. Like, what's going on inside you right now? And he said, well, I feel dread. I feel anxiety. What does she want now? I really don't want, I want to let it to go to voicemail, but she is my client, so I have to take it. Right. So you get the picture, right? I said, okay, so obviously Joan is going to be your homework, right? And so when we meet next time, which was going to be in a couple of months, I'd like you to just to see like what happens. Like just use this relationship as a frame to understand how your own mind is working. And what result does that particular construction create? The result of this relationship was that both of them were really frustrated with it. So for me, result is a kind of way of making an assessment of like, how are you doing, right? So let's take a situation where the result is kind of chronically not one that's good, right? So, okay, we're going to use this relationship with Joan, and you can start to see how your construction about Joan is influencing what you perceive as choices and actions that you have in this relationship, and those actions bring about a result. So let's see what happens when you start to pay attention to how you're constructing this relationship in your mind and see if the result changes. So a few months later, he comes back and said, so George, how's it going? He goes, well, after our talk, when I got back to the office, I didn't wait for Joan to call me. I called Joan. And the phone is ringing. Somebody picks up the phone, and I hear the frail voice of this elderly woman say hello. And then in a flash, it hit me that I remembered Joan's husband was actually my client, but he passed away, and I inherited Joan from him. Joan has no financial acumen whatsoever. And when she calls me, I realize that her anxiety, which I took personally, is really about the fact she is not comfortable with financial conversations. And I took these reactions that she had in a way and twisted them and personalized them in a way that I told myself this story, Joan wakes up to ruin my day, when in fact, she's an anxious elderly woman worried about her financial future, calling me for help. This is the insight he has the moment he hears her voice, right? About how he had constructed this relationship so far. And he said, that moment, I realized what a jerk I had been. My heart breaks open to this woman, right? Who may be really, genuinely concerned about her future. And at the end of that conversation, we were both astonished at how warm it had been. She wasn't waking up to ruin my day. She was a little old lady who needed my help. And by really understanding her in that way, we completely transformed that relationship so that the result was something that we now both value. So that's how I work, right? It's like, go to the difficult place and see, like, what are you doing? Like, how are you constructing something? And does it need to be that way? And what other options do you have? Like, what assumption can you let go of? What judgment can you let go of? What story can you let go of? What emotional reaction can you step away from? And when you do that, do more choices open up for you? Like better choices open up? Usually, yes. And usually that means the action we take is a little bit wiser, a little bit more intelligent. And that oftentimes the result you end up getting is a far better one.
What other practices or concrete practices do you suggest to your clients?
In 2020, I, with all of the stuff that went on, and part of it is still going on, right? It's really and people, found themselves in oftentimes truly painful situations, and oftentimes situations where there was a lot of darkness, where people had to make really difficult calls, and or were forced into situations that wouldn't be ones of their own choosing. One of the practices I really started to emphasize, both for others and for myself, was to cultivate a relationship with what's beautiful in your life, and which meant to intentionally look for sources of beauty in your, if you're at your desk, in your immediate environment, and to relish it, or to I'm going to say kind of wade in it or roll in it, or really open yourself to it. And A, it's not hard to do. B, it's very pleasant. And C, it has a way of, beauty has a power to undercut fear. And it's something I think in this culture we don't really have a robust understanding of, but I think is a general human truth, that beauty is a way of stepping out of the framework of survival to see a larger picture, to expand perception, right? Yeah, that yes, right now we are in a very painful circumstance, and this is also true, right? There is also the presence of beauty in the world. And that, I think, can be a very simple but profoundly nourishing thing.
How did you personally learn to cultivate the art of, I should say, the art of looking the beauty or looking at the source of beauty in turbulent times? It's very challenging for a lot of people. And certainly it is challenging for me as well sometimes.
Well, I think it was something that, well, I can tell you, before I had my surgery, I had a kidney transplant at the end of 2008, that the months running up to that were, I was really kind of, quite frankly, hanging on by a thread, and, I think literally at death's doorstep. And I had to get up super early in the morning to drive to the dialysis clinic, which was 45 minutes away from my house. And so I'd have to get up super early in the morning, like 4 o'clock in the morning, and drive in this very dark time to the clinic to get there on time for my appointment. And one of the practices I developed during that 45-minute drive was to look around at what was beautiful. And I kind of did it with a kind of gentle relentlessness, And then there was one day that I was driving down the 2 freeway, if you're familiar with Los Angeles, and there's a view to downtown Los Angeles on this freeway that's more or less unobstructed. And it was, again, early morning. And so you had all these bright lights shining off into the distance. And I was just paying attention to it. And I was noticing, how beautiful it was. And for some reason, that day was somehow some kind of tipping point. And I remember the exact moment where I thought, wow, that's really incredibly beautiful. These shimmering lights. And it's something happened inside my brain where it felt like a new kind of irrigation channel had opened, and I felt this like physical shift in my brain, and then this new channel got kind of irrigated with something, and I felt all the fear go away, and it more or less stayed that way for about a year. And it was an interesting experience, right? And so and I think all it was really relentlessly, and even what I call kind of gentle ruthlessness of paying attention to what was beautiful. And that showed me, okay, this was more than just like a casual little thing. I mean, it had some kind of deep neuroplastic impact.
And now, what do you tell yourself during the times of fear? If so, what does your inner conversation sound like?
Well, one is that, one of the benefits of a meditation practice and those kind of things is that you increase your capacity to decide what you're going to put your attention on or not. And I think that one of the useful outcomes is that you get more choice about whether or not you're going to feed a storyline in your head about fear and anxiety, or by giving it your attention or not. And that's not an easy thing to do. And I think it's probably the result of doing a lot of practice for people. But I think that's understanding at some level, it is possible to choose whether or not you feed fear or not. At the same time, I think it's really important. So what I have done in the last year is really, I'm sure you've had somebody on who's talked about vagal tone, and that's kind of like the master switch in terms of managing your nervous system. And what are the things that you can do to increase the robustness of your vagal tone, which might mean somatically oriented trauma healing. It might mean, Wim Hof breathing. But what I do is I take a cold shower every morning, and I've kind of eased into it. But I have to say, it is a way of ratcheting down the nervous system so that, your sympathetic nervous system, which is the kind of defense system, is less overactivated, and it gives you a kind of clarity.
What is your cold shower duration every morning?
Well, now it's just turning on the shower and walking into it. But that is not where I started by any means. I think for most people, and what I did was towards the end of the shower is to gradually turn the hot water down so that you move from a hot shower to a lukewarm shower to a mildly cool shower, over the course of several months, to let your body acclimate to it. And then at some point you just step into a cold shower. And then this is where a mindfulness practice is really useful, because you can use that coldness as an object of acceptance. So how do you stop resisting the fact that it is really, really cold right now?
I personally took cold water shower for about a year.
Oh, really? I'm so curious to know.
2 years ago, and it I didn't care it was summertime or the winter time. For straight 1 year, I used to take cold water shower in the morning before going to office. It was a beautiful experience. You just feel very, very different. Your energy is high. And I realized that my skin is getting softer. My hair is soft. It was a beautiful experience. It's difficult to explain, but I really felt good, very highly energized.
So I'm curious to know, as the year went on, like how did it change? And how did you change as a result?
I was very highly productive. My energy, my ability to focus on one thing for a long period of time, I will say that from 90 minutes to 2 hours, I could focus on one thing at a time. So cold water shower was one of the practices. I was already doing meditation and other practices. I will say that the cold water shower was icing on the cake, but I stopped doing
No
it.
pun
I
intended,
created the habit, but I stopped doing it. It's been more than a year. I haven't done that. So now I need to go back and start practicing it. It's like a habit. You have to stay consistent for any practice for a while so that it becomes autopilot.
Yeah. That's great. I had Dr. Parneet Paul on my podcast last month, and we talked about this exact thing, that your nervous system needs a kind of periodic shock to stimulate it at some level, and that those periodic shocks are really good for your for your overall health and well-being, because it's kind of provoking your nervous system into a more efficient way of operating. And I think it's really interesting for me to hear your experience that, you didn't have to meditate for 7 hours a day to increase your capacity to focus your attention, right? And it sounds like it was once you get used to it, it was a good experience.
It is a good experience. Now, I want to ask you about what questions would you encourage people to ask themselves if they are on any spectrum in their life? They are mindful or less mindful or super mindful, doesn't matter. What questions, what life philosophical questions would you encourage people to ask?
One question I think is really fundamental, which is like, what do I want? What do I want? It's interesting me once. I once asked my students, like, how many of you have a vision for what your life is or is going to be? And only 2 people did. And I thought, well, what are the rest of you assuming? Like, what's the story? And I think the story was that they just assumed it was going to happen. But I think first really getting clear about what's important to you and really being honest with yourself, because sometimes what's important to you isn't what's important to other people, and you might have to kind of step in a different direction than where other people are going in order to accomplish that. But really being clear about what's important to you.
So,
And then I would ask, what are the results I'm getting right now? And are they the ones that I want? And in an ideal world, and given of course what you have control over, right? And because I couldn't control, I had this disease and all that sort of stuff, but like, given what I have control over, are the results that I have now in my relationship or at work kind of reflective of what I want? And if it's not, then what's out of alignment, right? Do you really want that, first of all? And then if not, then what might you need to shift or let go of to increase the chances that that's that it's more, that you're more in alignment with what your heart's desires are in some way.
what is most important to you in the next phase of your life? Or what are the things must you want to do it?
Well, that's a good question. It's always, am I enjoying myself?
That is a good one.
Am I enjoying myself is always the first question. And it doesn't mean that I just do easy, pleasant things, but rather, am I enjoying this challenge? Am I enjoying doing it with these people? And, is it, because let's face it, at the end of the day, you're going to die. If you have some choice to do things that you find worthwhile and meaningful to you versus kind of trudging through your life, then why not?
Throughout all these practices and creating present moment awareness and with your decades of experience, I want to ask you, how have your personal relationship with your wife has changed or transformed or gotten better?
Well, I think I'm really lucky because I married somebody smarter than me, wiser than me, kinder than me. So she makes it easy. I think you should ask her that question. How do you put up with your husband? I think we have every day we say nice things to one another. I would say that in a very heartfelt way. And our day-to-day life is more or less pretty happy. I think we also talked a lot about what I just talked about, like, what do we each want? And, what do we want for ourselves? What do we want for our family? What do we want for our lives in general? And that we're more or less kind of aware of what that is for the other person. So we're kind of on the same page, and it helps that we're pretty complementary to begin with.
So how would your wife describe what you do for a living?
It's a good question. We were just trying to describe this to our son. What does Papa do? What does Papa do? I think, well, both she and I help people, but we do it in different ways. She's a designer. She's a branding designer, and she helps people by deeply understanding who they are and who their organization is, and then she manifests that in terms of graphic design and a brand identity. And I probably do the same thing, but with different tools. I really, my role is to help the people I work with understand who they are and help them bring forth what is truly important for them in their lives, and so that their lives can be expressions of that. And that's probably what I do.
Yes. And in one of your opening convocation at Wittenberg University, if I pronounce the name correctly,
That's right. Yeah.
you talked about what would you say to your 18-year-old about how to live life. Could you describe that in brief in this conversation?
That is a talk I gave, I think, in 2013. One is to be brave, right? And to really understand who you are and be brave. We don't talk a lot about bravery or courage, but I think if you really want to live a great life, it's stepping forward despite the fact it could be really scary to do so. And in a way, trust yourself, right? Be brave about and to allow your life to express what is really dear to you. I hope I remember that talk right. but I think that's what I would say to my 18-year-old kid. You tell me, Prof.
That's correct.
Okay, thank goodness.
So, is there anything that I should have asked you and I didn't ask you, Jeremy?
It's a good question. Yeah, you ask really great questions. And you've done your homework, sir. The one thing I think, going forward is that an image that came to me last year is like how do we help one another be islands of calm in a sea of chaos? And it's probably no surprise that the 21st century is going to be a pretty rocky time, right? It's going to be a time of really intense transition from one way of life to another. Even just taking viruses aside, just taking climate change and the transition to a post-carbon economy as one example, it's going to be a rocky time. And so I think to improve our chances of doing that successfully, like how do we be islands of calm in a sea of chaos so that we're anchors for other people who may feel strong amounts of fear? And how do you help people kind of step down from that to be calmer and clearer, wiser in their own actions? And I think that is something that is going to be really essential going forward. Yeah.
That is beautiful. And my last question to you, Jeremy, is where do you want our listeners to find you?
They can find me in any number of places. So I mentioned I have a podcast called Untaught Essentials, which is available wherever better podcasts are sold. Untaught Essentials. My website is jeremyhunter.net. It is going to be renewed shortly. Let's see. You can find me at the Drucker School of Management, where I have my day job and teaching. And where else? Feel free to link in or Facebook or any of those good things. I think and SoundCloud address is JeremyHunter123, because I couldn't think of anything more creative than that. I have a bunch of guided meditations and stuff like that. Oh, on YouTube too, Jeremy Hunter videos. And there's probably that talk I gave at Wittenberg is there. Maybe I don't know. I have to find out where that is and put it on.
I will put all the links in the show notes.
That's great.
I feel that this seems to be the perfect place to wrap up our conversation, Jeremy. And before we conclude, I want to quote one quote from Plato, that the unreflected life is not worth living. So, Jeremy, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you, Nishant. It was a real pleasure. Thanks for listening. If you like what you heard, please subscribe to the podcast. Give us a review and tell us your thoughts. The best thing you can do is share this with someone who would find it interesting and helpful. If you have an idea for other topics you'd like to explore, please let us know. Contact me at info@jeremyhunter.net. Thank you to the multi-talented Mr. Jason Beck for making the magic happen behind the scenes. And our music is the creation of Jeffrey with a G Munger. You can learn more about his work at kettleblackmusic.com.